You're my biggest regret. I should sleep with the dog instead of you." He spat those words on Christmas, but her reply destroyed him completely. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. May the Almighty wrap every woman in a shield of peace, honor, and unshakable dignity. May He bless your hearts with the gentleness that heals nations, the courage that lifts generations, and the grace that turns pain into wisdom. You are the first love we meet in this world, the voice that teaches us kindness, the hands that guide our future. The world rises because women rise. I pray your days overflow with calm, your nights rest in safety, and your path be filled with blessings that follow you wherever you step. May every heavy moment become light, every silent tear be replaced with joy, and every dream you carry come true in ways more beautiful than you imagined. You deserve oceans of love, endless respect, and a life filled with miracles. If this touched your heart, like the video, and tell me in the comments, what blessing are you praying for today? I will reply to each one of you. The coffee was perfect. 2 creams, 1 sugar, exactly the temperature that wouldn't burn his tongue. Natalie Aniston had spent a decade mastering this morning ritual, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind drifted somewhere far beyond this kitchen, this house, this marriage that had slowly suffocated the life out of her. Christmas morning smelled like cinnamon rolls baking and broken promises fermenting. The honey-glazed ham sat waiting on the counter, its surface glistening under kitchen lights. Roasted potatoes with fresh rosemary, made from his mother's recipe card with the faded handwriting, cooled on trivets. Green bean casserole assembled in the expensive ceramic dish Jeff's company had gifted them 5 years ago, back when he still introduced her as "my beautiful wife," instead of just the wife, or sometimes not at all. She carried his coffee to where he sprawled on the leather couch, eyes locked on his phone screen, thumb scrolling through messages from people who apparently mattered more than she did. "Your coffee," she said softly, setting it on the coaster she'd placed there an hour earlier. He took the mug without glancing up, without acknowledgement, without even the smallest gesture that might suggest he remembered she was human. Natalie stood there waiting. For what? She couldn't say any more. Maybe for him to see her. Maybe for the man she'd married to return from wherever he'd disappeared to. Maybe for something that had died so long ago she'd forgotten what it looked like when it was still breathing. The doorbell shattered the silence like glass breaking. Jeff's family arrived in a rush of winter air and strained cheerfulness. His mother swept in wearing expensive perfume and thinly veiled judgment, handing off her coat to Natalie without making eye contact. Ryan, Jeff's younger brother, pulled Natalie into a warm hug that felt like an apology for crimes he hadn't committed. Michelle, Ryan's wife, pressed a bottle of expensive wine into Natalie's hands and whispered, "You look exhausted, honey. Are you sleeping okay?" Natalie forced a smile that made her facial muscles ache. "I'm fine. Everything's ready. Come sit." The dining room table looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Natalie had spent 3 hours that morning arranging everything. The good china they only used twice a year, cloth napkins folded into perfect fans, fresh flowers from the expensive downtown florist, because Jeff's mother would notice and comment if she'd used grocery store arrangements. Everything flawless, everything controlled. Everything screaming with the desperation of a woman trying to prove she deserved the oxygen she consumed. They gathered around the table. Jeff took his seat at the head, like a king surveying subjects. Natalie sat at the opposite end, separated from him by 6 feet of polished wood and a chasm of indifference so wide she could have drowned in it. "This looks absolutely incredible, Natalie," Ryan said, reaching for the homemade biscuits that had taken her an hour to prepare from scratch. His smile was genuine, kind. "You really outdid yourself this year." "It's beautiful," Michelle agreed, her eyes warm in a way that made Natalie's throat constrict. "You have such a gift for making everything feel special." Jeff's mother made a small sound that could have been agreement or indigestion, impossible to tell with her, and Natalie had stopped trying to interpret years ago. "Well, she's got the time for it," Jeff said casually, loading his plate with food Natalie had been preparing since before sunrise. His tone was light, conversational, the kind of cruelty that wore a smile. Not like she's got anything else filling her days. The words landed like a slap across bare skin. Natalie's hands froze on the serving spoon. Ryan's smile evaporated. Michelle's eyes dropped to her plate. Jeff's mother pressed her lips together but remained silent, which was somehow worse than speaking because silence was permission, and they all knew it. "Jeff," Ryan started carefully, his voice carrying a warning edge, "that's not really—" "What?" "I'm stating facts, not being mean." Jeff looked around the table with genuine confusion about why the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. "She doesn't work. We don't have kids. She makes breakfast and keeps the house nice. It's not criticism, it's just reality." But it was criticism. It always was, wrapped in casual observations and reasonable tones that made Natalie question whether she had any right to feel gutted. She picked up the coffee pot with hands that didn't shake. She'd learned that trick years ago, and began methodically refilling cups, one by one, breathing through the humiliation, surviving this moment the way she'd survived hundreds before it. Michelle tried to redirect. "So, Jeff, Ryan mentioned you were being considered for that promotion. How's that?" "Actually," Jeff interrupted, setting down his fork with theatrical precision, "since we're all here, all family, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind." Natalie's stomach plummeted. She knew that tone, that expression, the way he leaned back in his chair like a prosecutor about to deliver closing arguments. Jeff looked directly at her, through her, past her to some point only he could see. "You're my biggest regret," he said. The words came out clear, loud, final as a judge's gavel. "You know that? I think about it sometimes when I'm at work or out with actual ambitious people. Marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life. Hell, I'd rather sleep with Duke than you. At least when I come home, the dog's happy to see me. At least he's loyal. At least he serves a purpose." The silence that followed was the kind that devours sound and light and oxygen, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat thundering in your ears, the kind that precedes catastrophe. Natalie felt every eye on her, felt the weight of their pity and shock and second-hand embarrassment crushing her into her chair, felt something deep inside her chest crack cleanly in half, and then immediately calcify into something cold and sharp and absolutely unbreakable. Ryan shoved back from the table so violently his chair scraped against hardwood like a scream. "What the hell is wrong with you? Sit down, Ryan. I'm having a conversation with my wife." "You're humiliating her, on Christmas, in front of all of us." Ryan's face had gone red with rage. "Jesus Christ, Jeff, listen to yourself." "Oh, please. She'll get over it. She always does." Jeff waved a dismissive hand like he was swatting a fly, then picked up his fork again. "Natalie, can you pass the butter?" Something shifted in the room. Or maybe it shifted in Natalie. She stood slowly, every movement deliberate and precise. Picked up the coffee pot from where she'd set it down, walked around the table with the controlled grace of someone who'd left her body and was watching from somewhere far away. She refilled each cup, Jeff's, his mother's, Ryan's, Michelle's. Her face remained blank, serene even. Her voice when she spoke was calm as still water. "Would anyone like more bacon?" Jeff's mother stared at her like she'd started speaking in tongues. Michelle had tears streaming silently down her face. Ryan looked between Natalie and his brother with an expression approaching horror. But Natalie just stood there holding the coffee pot, waiting politely for someone to answer her question about bacon, as if her husband hadn't just compared her unfavorably to a dog, as if her world hadn't just shattered, as if any of this was remotely normal. "We're leaving," Ryan announced, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. "Mom, get your coat, we're done here." "Don't be so dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being a decent human being. Something you've apparently forgotten how to do." Ryan turned to Natalie, and the pity in his eyes hurt worse than Jeff's cruelty. "Natalie, I'm so sorry. You deserve so much better than this. You always have." They gathered their things in tense silence. Jeff's mother touched Natalie's arm on her way out, a gesture that meant nothing, changed nothing, helped nothing, just another empty motion in a lifetime of them. The door closed behind them. Silence rushed back in to fill the space. Jeff tossed his napkin onto his plate with theatrical annoyance. Well, that was unnecessary. Happy now? You made my family leave on Christmas. Natalie turned to face him, really looked at him for the first time in months. This man she'd given a decade to, this man who'd spent that decade teaching her in 1,000 small ways that she was worthless. This man who had absolutely no idea what was coming for him. I made them leave, she repeated, her voice soft, dangerous. Yeah, standing there playing the victim. It's pathetic, Nat. You're pathetic. He stood, grabbed his phone from the table. I'm going to watch the game, clean this mess up. He walked away, left her standing in the ruins of the Christmas breakfast she'd spent hours preparing for a family that had fled rather than watch her be destroyed. Natalie began clearing plates, methodical, automatic. The warm water ran over her hands as she washed each dish carefully, even though they had a perfectly functional dishwasher. She needed the time, needed the repetitive motion, needed to feel the hard, cold thing in her chest solidify into absolute certainty. This wasn't the first time Jeff had hurt her. Wouldn't have been the last if she'd allowed the pattern to continue. She remembered last month's dinner party when Jeff had introduced her to his colleagues as the help and laughed when she'd corrected him. Remembered his friends shifting uncomfortably while Jeff doubled down on the joke until it stopped being a joke and became just cruelty, served alongside appetizers. She remembered the time before that when she'd mentioned wanting to take a photography class and Jeff had asked why she needed hobbies when taking care of him was a full-time job. She remembered the time before that, and before that, and before that, a decade of small cuts that had bled her dry. But 18 months ago, something had shifted. She'd overheard Jeff on the phone with someone from work, laughing, casual, saying words that had lodged in her brain like shrapnel. My wife. Man, she's like furniture. Useful for what she does, but you don't really notice her anymore, you know. Just kind of blends into the background. That's when the part of her that had been slowly dying finally stopped fighting and started planning instead. Natalie had begun documenting everything that night, not just to leave. Any fool could walk out the door. She'd started building something bigger, something he would feel in his bones for the rest of his life, something that would make him understand, finally and irrevocably, what he'd thrown away. She dried the last plate and put it in the cabinet with precise care, folded the dish towel with perfect corners, then walked to the garage where Jeff couldn't hear her and pulled out her phone. The call connected on the third ring. Natalie? Lucas Tanner's voice was warm, even filtered through the phone, professional but genuinely kind. Everything all right? It's time, she said. Her voice was steady. No tears, no emotion, just the certainty of someone who'd finally stopped questioning and started acting. Start everything Monday morning. A pause. She heard him shift, heard papers rustle in the background. You're absolutely certain. Once we begin this process, there's no walking it back. She thought of the dog comment, thought of his family's horrified faces, thought of a decade of mornings making perfect coffee for a man who'd never once thanked her, thought of becoming so invisible in her own life that she'd almost forgotten she existed. I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life. All right then. She heard the smile in his voice, the respect. Monday morning, we file everything. Are you safe there tonight? He's drunk. He won't remember this conversation even happened by tomorrow. Call me if that changes, any time, day or night. I mean that, Natalie. I know. Thank you, Lucas. She ended the call, deleted it from her recent calls list. Stood in the cold garage listening to Jeff's television blaring through the walls of this house that had been her prison. Then she went back inside, climbed the stairs and walked past their bedroom where Jeff lay sprawled across the mattress, already snoring off his Christmas whiskey. She stood in the doorway watching him for a long moment. This man who'd promised to love and cherish her. This man who'd spent their marriage systematically crushing that promise under the weight of his indifference and contempt. Natalie leaned close to his ear and whispered words he wouldn't remember. "You have no idea what's coming." Then she turned and walked to the guest room where she'd been sleeping for months. Another thing Jeff had never questioned, never noticed, never cared enough about to ask why. She climbed into the narrow bed and closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, Natalie Aniston slept deeply, soundly, without the nightmares that usually haunted her. Because the war had already begun. Jeff just didn't know it yet. By the time he figured it out, it would be far too late to stop what she'd set in motion. Chapter 2. The Invisible Strings. Jeff woke the day after Christmas feeling like someone had taken a hammer to his skull from the inside. Whiskey hangover. The kind that made light feel like violence and every sound like broken glass scraping against bone. He stumbled downstairs sometime after noon, following the smell of coffee already brewed and bacon already cooked to perfection. Aspirin and a glass of water sat waiting on the kitchen counter, like an offering to a deity who didn't deserve worship. Natalie stood at the stove, her back to him, movements efficient and silent as a ghost. She didn't turn around when he entered. He swallowed the pills, drank the water, poured coffee into his favorite mug, the one Natalie always kept on the shelf he could reach without stretching. These small gestures of consideration he'd stopped noticing years ago. "Afternoon," he muttered, already scrolling through his phone. "Afternoon," she echoed. Her voice was flat, empty of inflection. Jeff frowned, trying to pull yesterday through the whiskey fog. Something about his family, something about dinner going sideways. The details wouldn't focus. "My family being overly sensitive again?" he asked, sitting at the table without looking up from his screen. They left upset. "About what?" Natalie finally turned to face him. Her dark eyes looked through him rather than at him. "You told them I was your biggest regret, that you'd rather sleep with Duke than with me." Jeff shifted in his chair. A vague memory stirred. "That was obviously a joke. Your mother didn't find it humorous, neither did Ryan. My mother's always been too sensitive, and Ryan's got some kind of savior complex." He scrolled through messages he'd been ignoring, texts from Ryan he deleted without reading, missed calls from his mother he had no intention of returning. "I've got work to catch up on. Conference calls scheduled for later." He stood, grabbed his coffee, walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving Natalie standing there like a piece of furniture he'd stopped seeing. Behind him, once his footsteps faded up the stairs, Natalie pulled out her phone, sent a text to a number saved under an innocuous name. He doesn't remember what he said, exactly as predicted. The response came within seconds. "Perfect. Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2? Natalie glanced toward the ceiling where Jeff's footsteps creaked above her head. She typed carefully, "Begin the Brook extraction." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Already in motion. She'll be out by end of week." Natalie deleted the entire conversation thread and went back to wiping down counters that were already spotless, keeping her hands busy, keeping her mind focused, counting down the weeks until she could stop pretending. Upstairs, Jeff opened his laptop to emails he should have answered before the holiday shutdown. His phone buzzed constantly, work messages, holiday greetings from colleagues, a text from Brooke that made him smile despite his pounding headache. Brooke was his assistant at the firm, 26 years old, sharp as a blade, ambitious in ways that reminded Jeff of himself a decade ago, before marriage had made him soft. They'd been texting for months now, nothing physical, nothing that crossed any actual lines, just attention. The kind Natalie used to provide before she'd stopped making any effort at all. He opened Brooke's message. "Coffee Monday, need to discuss the Henderson project before the new year." Jeff typed back, "Absolutely, my treat. Looking forward to it." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. His stomach tightened in a way he didn't want to examine too closely. Then, "Actually, I need to talk to you about something important. Can I call you now?" Jeff's finger hovered over the phone icon. That didn't sound like her normal tone. He pressed call. She answered on the first ring. "Jeff, hi." Her voice sounded strained, careful. "What's going on? You sound weird." Silence. Too long, too heavy with things unsaid. "I'm resigning," Brooke said finally, each word measured. "Effective immediately. I won't be coming back after the holiday break." "What?" "Brooke, what the hell happened? Did someone say something to you? Because if you felt uncomfortable or... I got an offer from another firm. Better position, better opportunity. I start next week." "Which firm? Maybe I can match their offer. You're too valuable to lose over salary." "It's not about money, Jeff." She sounded tired, sad even. "It's time for me to move on. That's all. I wish you the best with everything." "This is about the Henderson project, isn't it? If I put too much pressure on you with the deadlines..." "No, nothing like that." A pause. "I just think it's better for everyone if I make a clean break. I'm sorry it's sudden." "Brooke, wait. Just tell me what's really..." The line went dead. Jeff stared at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. Tried calling back immediately, straight to voicemail, sent a text. "Please call me back. We need to talk about this properly." The message showed delivered, then read. No response came. Jeff felt something twist in his chest. Brooke had been his ally at work, his sounding board, the one person who made him feel seen and valued and important in ways Natalie had stopped providing years ago, and she'd just vanished without real explanation. Downstairs, Natalie's phone vibrated against the counter. A text from Lucas. "Brooke accepted our offer." Showed her the evidence of Jeff's financial situation, the hidden debts, the credit card spending on her, the internal investigation brewing. She's smart enough to recognize a sinking ship. Got herself out before she drowns with him. Natalie allowed herself a small smile and typed back. One piece removed from the board. She deleted the exchange and returned to her systematic erasure of Christmas, taking down decorations, boxing ornaments, erasing all evidence that yesterday had ever happened. That evening, Natalie made pot roast, Jeff's absolute favorite. Carrots and potatoes cooked until they melted on the tongue. Meat so tender it fell apart at the suggestion of a fork. The smell filled the entire house with false comfort and temporary peace. Jeff came down for dinner, looking sullen, sat heavily at the table without speaking. Natalie served him a generous portion, and he picked at it like a child forced to eat vegetables. "Something wrong with the food?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Food's fine. You seem troubled." He looked up sharply, studied her face with sudden intensity. She looked genuinely concerned, caring even. When had Natalie started looking at him with actual warmth again? "Brooke quit today, completely out of nowhere." "Brooke?" Natalie said her name the way you might say the name of a distant acquaintance, neutral, unimportant. "Your assistant?" "Yeah. Just called me and said she was leaving, some job offer she supposedly can't refuse." That does sound sudden. That's an understatement. Jeff pushed food around his plate. "I don't understand what happened. Everything was fine. We had good rapport. And then just... nothing. Gone." Natalie reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He nearly flinched. She hadn't voluntarily touched him in months, maybe longer. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," she said softly, her eyes meeting his with what looked like genuine sympathy. "I know how much you valued working with her." Jeff stared at his wife's hand covering his own, looked at her face, showing actual concern for his well-being. Something shifted in him, uncomfortable, like a bone settling back into place after being dislocated. "Thanks, Nat. That actually means a lot." She squeezed his hand once, then withdrew and returned to her meal. They ate in silence, but it felt different than the usual oppressive quiet, almost companionable, almost like the early days. Later that night, after Jeff had gone to bed still brooding about Brooke's betrayal, Natalie sat in the guest room with her laptop open to a hidden folder she'd created 18 months ago. The folder Lucas had helped her organize into something weapon-grade. Bank statements documenting every joint account she'd been quietly photographing. Credit card bills showing Jeff's extravagant spending, expensive lunches, flowers, gifts, all for Brooke. All charged to cards Natalie was technically responsible for. Screenshots of text messages that danced right up to the line of emotional infidelity and sometimes leaped across it entirely. Mortgage documents for the house refinancing Jeff had completed without her knowledge or consent, forging her signature on paperwork she'd never seen. Intake forms for the couple's therapist she'd already scheduled them with. Dr. Sarah Chen, recommended by Lucas, who understood exactly what documentation meant in divorce proceedings. Everything was ready, every piece positioned precisely where it needed to be. She opened her calendar and counted forward. 7 weeks until execution. 7 weeks of maintaining this performance. 7 weeks of being the devoted wife, while the trap closed tighter and tighter around Jeff's throat. Her phone lit up with a text from Lucas. "How are you holding up?" "I know pretending is exhausting," she typed back. "I'm fine. Better than fine. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I'm doing and exactly where this ends." "You're stronger than you realize, Natalie." "I'm strong because I had to be." He made certain of that. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we finalize the restraining order documentation. Everything's coming together. I'll be ready." Natalie closed her laptop and looked around the small guest room that had become her sanctuary. This room Jeff never entered. This space he didn't even think about because she existed so far outside his awareness that he'd stopped registering her as a person years ago. Soon she'd have more than a sanctuary. She'd have freedom. But first, Jeff needed to understand viscerally what it felt like to lose everything you'd taken for granted. The way he'd made her lose herself, one morning at a time, one casual cruelty at a time, one systematic dismissal at a time, until there was barely anything left of the woman she used to be before she'd made the catastrophic mistake of marrying him. Natalie turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around her. Down the hall, Jeff snored peacefully, completely secure in his belief that his wife would always be there, would always stay, would always forgive, would never have the strength or courage to leave. He was spectacularly wrong about all of it. And by the time he realized his mistake, it would be far too late to stop the consequences bearing down on him like a freight train he'd never seen coming. Chapter 3. The Loving Trap. January dissolved into February with freezing rain and temperatures cold enough to make bones ache. But inside their house, something unexpected was happening. Natalie was transforming, or appearing to transform. She became warmer, softer, present in ways she hadn't been in years, maybe ever during their marriage. It started subtly. Instead of leaving Jeff's coffee on the counter and disappearing into household tasks, Natalie sat with him during breakfast, asked genuine-seeming questions about his upcoming day, actually listened when he answered, nodding at appropriate moments, asking follow-up questions that suggested she cared about the answers. She started wearing her hair down the way he'd once mentioned he preferred, put on makeup most mornings, dressed in clothes that weren't just functional, but flattering, smiled more often. Jeff noticed. How could he not? "You feeling all right?" he asked one morning, suspicious of this sudden shift. "I feel fine. Why wouldn't I? I don't know. You just seem different." "Different bad or different good?" Jeff studied her face, looking for the trap he felt certain was there, found nothing but patient warmth. "Different good, I guess. It's just unexpected." Natalie smiled and refilled his coffee. "Can't a wife want to be present for her husband?" The pattern continued and intensified. Natalie cooked elaborate dinners, and they ate together at the dining room table, instead of her serving him and retreating upstairs while he ate in front of the television. She asked about work with genuine interest, laughed at his jokes, some of which weren't even funny, touched his arm when he talked. Small gestures of affection he'd forgotten existed between them. One evening after a particularly good meal, she appeared in their bedroom doorway. Jeff looked up from his phone, startled. She hadn't willingly entered this room in months. "Mind if I sleep in here tonight?" she asked quietly. "The guest room gets so cold this time of year." Jeff set his phone aside immediately. "Of course, this is your room too. It always has been." She climbed into bed beside him, and he caught the scent of her shampoo, something floral he vaguely remembered from their early years together. When she curled against him, fitting her body to his, he felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in their presence together for years: guilt. "I've been terrible to you," he said into the darkness above them. "Yes, you have been." The blunt agreement surprised a sound out of him, not quite a laugh, but adjacent to one. "You're not going to soften that at all. Would there be a point in lying about it?" Jeff pulled her closer, wrapped his arms around her smaller frame. "I'm sorry. About Christmas. About how I've been treating you for... honestly, I don't even know how long. You deserve so much better." Natalie remained quiet for a long moment, her breathing steady against his chest. Then, softly, "I know I deserve better." She didn't say she forgave him, didn't say it was all right, didn't offer the absolution he was fishing for, just, "I know." It should have been a warning, a flashing red light, a siren. But Jeff was too relieved by her physical presence, too grateful for this unexpected warmth, to question the gift being offered. By mid-February, they'd settled into a new rhythm that felt almost like the early days of their marriage, before everything had curdled. Natalie was attentive, interested. She asked about work stress and actually seemed to care about his answers, cooked meals that took hours to prepare, even joined him on the couch for movies, something she hadn't done in years. One evening after dinner, chicken piccata that had required 3 hours of preparation, Jeff opened up about escalating problems at work. "The Henderson project is an absolute disaster without Brooke," he admitted, pushing elegant pasta around his plate. "I'm drowning in details she used to handle effortlessly. The new assistant they assigned me is completely useless. Takes an hour to do what Brooke did in 10 minutes. Can you request someone more competent?" "I've tried. Nobody good is available right now." He rubbed his face with both hands, exhaustion written into every line. "And there's other pressure building. Financial stuff. The company's going through major restructuring. My entire division might be downsized. I could be looking at significant pay cuts." Natalie reached across the table and took his hand in both of hers. The gesture felt natural, easy. He'd forgotten what easy felt like between them. "How bad is the financial situation?" she asked gently, her thumb tracing small circles on his palm. "Bad enough that I had to make some moves you don't know about?" He watched her face carefully, bracing for the explosion. "I refinanced the house a while back, took out some equity, used it for investments that should have paid off by now but haven't materialized yet." "You refinanced our house without discussing it with me?" Here it comes, Jeff thought. The accusations, the fight, the tears, the guilt trip that would last for weeks. But Natalie just squeezed his hand tighter, her expression sympathetic rather than accusatory. "We'll figure it out together," she said softly, her eyes meeting his with what looked like unwavering support. "That's what marriage is supposed to mean, right? Partnership, facing things as a team." Jeff stared at his wife. This woman he'd spent years diminishing and dismissing. This woman who was offering him grace he absolutely didn't deserve and definitely hadn't earned. "Yeah," he managed past the unexpected thickness in his throat. "Yeah, that's exactly what it should be." That night, after Jeff fell asleep, Natalie carefully extracted herself from their bed. She locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the shower for noise cover, and pulled out her phone. Photographed the mortgage refinancing documents Jeff had left scattered on his desk, too trusting now to hide them. Sent them to Lucas with a message. "He refinanced without my signature, my name forged on the paperwork, spent the equity on Brooke, gifts, expensive restaurants, trips, and gambling losses in Atlantic City I'm just discovering. He has no idea I know any of this. Evidence attached." Lucas's response came within minutes. "That's fraud. Multiple felony counts. We can use this to absolutely destroy him in court. You're doing incredible work, Natalie." She deleted the messages, flushed the toilet for authenticity, washed her hands, and looked at herself in the mirror, studying the face of the woman staring back. Same dark eyes, same features. But inside, Natalie felt like someone she no longer recognized. "What are you becoming?" she asked her reflection silently. The answer came swift and certain. Someone who survives, someone who refuses to be erased. She returned to bed where Jeff had rolled into the warm space she'd vacated, his arms stretched across the empty sheets, searching for her even in sleep. She stood there a moment watching him, this man who'd promised to love and cherish her, this man who'd spent their entire marriage systematically crushing that promise under the weight of his contempt and indifference. She climbed back into bed, let him pull her close unconsciously, pressed her face against his shoulder, and began mentally planning the next phase of his complete destruction. The following week, Natalie suggested couples therapy over breakfast. Therapy? Jeff looked skeptical, defensive. "You think we need that?" "I think we could be stronger together. Don't you want that?" She looked at him with warm eyes that had been so cold for so long. "Things have been genuinely better between us lately. I'd like to keep building on that foundation, make sure we don't slip back into old patterns." Jeff considered this. Things had been better. Natalie had been present, the way she used to be in their early years. Maybe therapy could help maintain this momentum, keep her from retreating back into that cold distance. "Okay," he agreed. "If you think it'll help us, I'm willing to try." Natalie found them a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who came highly recommended. By Lucas, though Jeff would never know that detail. A therapist who understood that sometimes helping a woman meant meticulously documenting everything her husband admitted during sessions. Their first appointment was Thursday evening. They sat on opposite ends of a comfortable couch in Dr. Chen's warm office. The therapist appeared to be in her 50s, kind eyes behind stylish glasses, the sort of calm presence that made you want to confess your deepest secrets. "Why don't we start with what brought you both here today?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice gentle and non-judgmental. Jeff glanced at Natalie. She nodded encouragingly, as though she genuinely wanted him to open up, to be honest, to heal. "We've had some rough patches," Jeff began carefully, choosing his words. "I work in a high-pressure environment, long hours. Maybe I've been emotionally checked out at home." "Can you give me a specific example of being checked out?" Jeff shifted on the couch. "I don't know. Small things. Being on my phone too much. Not paying attention when she talks. The usual stuff." "Jeff," Natalie said quietly, her voice carrying just the right amount of gentle prompting. "Tell her about Christmas." He froze, looked at her with something approaching panic. She just nodded again, patient and calm, as though she trusted him to do the right thing. "I said some things," Jeff admitted slowly. The words dragged out of him. "On Christmas morning, in front of my family, things I absolutely shouldn't have said." Dr. Chen's pen hovered over her notepad. "What kind of things?" The silence stretched uncomfortable and thick. Jeff's hands twisted together in his lap. Finally, barely audible, "I told her she was my biggest regret, that I'd rather sleep with our dog than with her." Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but she made a careful, deliberate note on her pad. "How did that make you feel, Natalie?" the therapist asked, turning her attention fully to the wife. "Small," Natalie said, her voice just barely above a whisper. "Perfect, vulnerable. Invisible, like I don't matter, like I've never mattered." "And was this an isolated incident?" "No." Dr. Chen looked back at Jeff, her gaze penetrating. "Tell me about your typical day at home. How do you and Natalie interact?" Jeff described their routine. Or rather, his routine. Wake to coffee already made precisely how he likes it. Breakfast waiting, clothes laid out. Come home to dinner prepared. Fall asleep watching television while she cleans up. "When do you talk to Natalie?" Dr. Chen asked. "Actually talk, I mean, about things that matter to her." Jeff opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We talk." "About what specifically?" "I don't know. household stuff, whether we need groceries, that sort of thing. When's the last time you asked Natalie about her dreams, her interests, her feelings about her own life? Jeff looked genuinely confused, like the question was being asked in a foreign language. She doesn't work. Her day is managing the house, I guess. Dr. Chen turned to Natalie, and Natalie felt the therapist truly seeing her, seeing everything Jeff had missed for years because he'd stopped looking. What do you do with your time, Natalie? How do you spend your days? I volunteer at our church twice a week, help coordinate the food bank program. I read extensively. I used to paint. I was actually quite good at it, but I stopped several years ago. Why did you stop painting? Natalie looked directly at Jeff, let him see the hurt he'd caused. My husband told me it was a waste of time, that I should focus on useful things, things that contributed to our household. Jeff's face flushed dark red. I didn't mean it like... You said painting was just a hobby, Natalie continued, her voice still calm but carrying an edge now. That I should spend my energy on things that actually mattered. So I stopped. I thought you agreed with me. I thought we discussed it and you saw my point. No, Jeff, I stopped arguing with you. There's a profound difference. The session continued for the full hour. Dr. Chen expertly drawing out confessions Jeff didn't realize he was making. About his emotional distance, his pattern of criticism disguised as jokes, his inability, or unwillingness, to see Natalie as a complete person rather than a collection of functions that made his life easier. About the text messages with Brooke that weren't physical, but were intimate in ways that betrayed their marriage just as completely. About his deep resentment when Natalie had been content being just a housewife while he climbed the corporate ladder, as though her choices about her own life were somehow personal affronts to his ambitions. By the end, Jeff looked shaken, pale, like he'd been forced to see himself through a mirror he'd been avoiding for years. Natalie looked composed, controlled, exactly as she'd practiced. In the car ride home, Jeff was silent for a long time. Then, that was harder than I expected it to be. Therapy usually is. I really hurt you, didn't I? All those years, all those small cuts that I told myself didn't matter. Natalie looked out the window at the dark winter landscape rushing past. Yes, you did. I want to fix this. I swear to God, Nat, I want to do better, be better. She turned to face him, let him see tears that were absolutely real, because underneath all the strategy, underneath the careful planning, the pain was genuine and deep and had been festering for years. Then fix it, she said simply. That night Jeff tried. He asked her about her day with genuine interest. Really asked, really listened to her answers, thanked her for dinner, told her specifically what he enjoyed about the food, helped her load the dishwasher instead of disappearing to the living room. Small gestures, tiny efforts that cost him almost nothing but meant everything to a woman who'd been starved for basic respect. Too little, far too late. But Natalie smiled and accepted each gesture with apparent gratitude, because every word Jeff spoke in therapy was being documented with his full legal consent. Every admission recorded in a state where one-party consent made it admissible. Every confession captured for the moment when Lucas would lay it all out in divorce court and watch Jeff's world burn. She was building her case one session at a time, one careful conversation at a time, and Jeff, desperate to save a marriage he'd spent years destroying through 1,000 casual cruelties, was handing her everything she needed to completely obliterate him. Later, alone in the bathroom while Jeff brushed his teeth, Natalie texted Lucas, "First session complete. He admitted to the Christmas incident, the emotional affair with Brooke, his resentment of my life choices. Everything recorded and documented. Dr. Chen says he's a textbook case. Perfect. How many more sessions do you think you can manage?" 5 or 6. Then I execute. You're incredible, you know that. What you're doing takes strength most people don't have. Natalie looked at herself in the mirror, at the tears still drying on her cheeks, at the exhaustion written into every line of her face. "I'm not incredible," she typed back. I'm just done being invisible." She deleted the entire conversation, went back to the bedroom where Jeff was already in bed, looking at her with something that might have been hope. She climbed in beside him, let him hold her, let him believe things were getting better, and counted down the days until she could finally, mercifully stop this performance, until she could burn down everything he'd built on her erasure and walk away into a future he would spend the rest of his life envying. Chapter 4. The Crumbling Foundation. March arrived with bitter cold, and Jeff's world began fracturing in ways he couldn't understand or control. His work situation deteriorated like a building with structural damage, slowly at first, easy to ignore, then catastrophically all at once. The company restructuring he'd mentioned became brutally real. His division was being systematically downsized. His performance reviews, which had been stellar for years, now contained phrases like distracted from core responsibilities and failure to meet revised benchmarks and concerns about professional judgment. He brought every ounce of that stress home with him each evening like a disease. Natalie absorbed it all, made his favorite meals with meticulous care, rubbed his shoulders while he vented about incompetent colleagues and management that didn't appreciate his contributions, listened to him talk for hours about office politics and power dynamics and who was positioning themselves for survival. "They don't appreciate what I've given that company," he complained one night over the salmon she'd spent an hour preparing to perfection. He pushed the food around his plate without actually eating. "After everything, years of my life, nights, weekends, missing family events to close deals, and this is how they repay loyalty. Have you talked directly to your boss about your concerns?" "He's part of the problem. Ever since Brooke left, it's like he's been watching me differently, looking for mistakes, documenting every tiny misstep." Jeff's hand tightened around his fork until his knuckles went white. "I think someone's been spreading rumors about me, saying things behind my back." Natalie made a sympathetic sound, reaching across to touch his free hand. She didn't mention that she knew exactly why his boss was watching him closely, didn't mention the anonymous tip Lucas's investigator had sent to HR about inappropriate expense reports, flowers charged to the company card, expensive lunches at restaurants way above his authorization level, all with Brooke, all violations of company policy. "Maybe the situation will stabilize once the restructuring is complete," she offered, her voice soothing. "Maybe." But the situation didn't stabilize. It detonated. 2 weeks later, Jeff was called into his boss's office. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. When he returned to his desk, his hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his phone to call Natalie. He was being placed on immediate suspension, pending the outcome of an internal investigation into misuse of company funds. Not fired, not yet, but suspended without pay while they conducted their audit. Escorted from the building by security like a common criminal. His co-workers watching, whispering, judging. The humiliation was absolute. He drove home in a fog of disbelief and found Natalie in the kitchen preparing dinner as though it were any other ordinary day. "I'm suspended," he said flatly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. She turned immediately, concern flooding her features, crossed to him without hesitation, took both his hands in hers. "What happened? Tell me everything." He did. The investigation, the allegations, the accusations that he'd been systematically charging personal expenses to his corporate account. The very real possibility of termination without severance if they found sufficient evidence of wrongdoing. "But it's all explainable," he insisted, his voice rising with panic and desperation. "Those lunches were legitimate business meetings. The gifts were for client relations. The flowers were all purchased with Brooke in mind," Natalie finished gently, not accusingly. Jeff's face went white. "How did you... You've mentioned your working relationship with her. How close you two were?" Natalie's voice remained calm, soothing. The voice of someone who wasn't judging, just observing. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Jeff. I'm just saying I understand how it might look to the company, how they might interpret the pattern." Jeff sagged against the kitchen counter, all the fight drained out of him in a single terrible moment. I'm terrified, Nat. What if they fire me? What if I can't find another position in the industry? We have the mortgage, the refinancing loan, all those credit cards with balances I've been carrying. Natalie pulled him into her arms without hesitation, held him while his shoulders shook. This man who'd made her feel worthless for years was falling completely apart in her embrace, and she felt absolutely nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, no pity, just the cold, mathematical certainty that everything was proceeding exactly according to the plan she and Lucas had architected down to the smallest detail. "We'll figure it out together," she murmured into his hair, her voice perfectly modulated for comfort. "That's what partners do. We face things together." That evening in their therapy session, Dr. Chen noticed Jeff's distress the moment they walked through her door. "What's happened since our last session?" she asked, her pen already poised above her notepad. Jeff explained the suspension, the investigation, his overwhelming terror of losing everything he'd worked his entire adult life to build. "How does this situation make you feel, Natalie?" Dr. Chen asked, turning her attention to the wife. "Worried, obviously. Concerned for our financial stability." Natalie paused, seeming to choose her next words with care. "But also, I keep thinking that maybe this is an opportunity for us to reevaluate what actually matters. Jeff's been defining himself by his job title and salary for so long, by external markers of success. Maybe if those things get stripped away, we can figure out who we really are underneath all that noise." Jeff looked at her with something approaching wonder, disbelief that she could be so understanding. "You'd still want to be with me?" he asked, his voice cracking with vulnerability. "Even if I lose my job, even if we have to sell the house, downsize, completely start over?" Natalie reached for his hand, squeezed it firmly, looked him directly in the eyes with an expression of unwavering devotion. "I married you, Jeff. Not your job title, not your salary, not any external thing. I married the person you are. That's what matters to me." It was absolutely the perfect thing to say. The exact words a devoted wife would offer her struggling husband in his darkest hour. It was also a complete and calculated lie. Dr. Chen made extensive notes. Jeff squeezed Natalie's hand so hard it hurt. The session continued, with Jeff opening up about his fears, his failures, his deep-seated terror that he was fundamentally worthless without his professional identity. Afterward, standing in the parking lot under harsh fluorescent lights, Jeff pulled Natalie close and held her like she was the only stable thing in his collapsing universe. "I don't deserve you," he said into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "No," Natalie agreed softly, her face hidden against his shoulder. "You really don't." He laughed, thinking she was playing along, joking with him to lighten the mood. She wasn't joking at all. The investigation took 3 brutal weeks. During that time, Natalie became absolutely indispensable in ways that would have been touching if they weren't so coldly strategic. She managed their tightening budget with precision, made calls to creditors to negotiate temporary payment arrangements, assured Jeff constantly that they would survive whatever consequences came. She also began carefully, almost casually, mentioning the possibility of having a baby together. It happened one night as they were preparing for bed. Jeff was brushing his teeth, stress radiating off him in palpable waves. Natalie was folding his laundry because even in crisis some patterns held firm. "Michelle called today. She's pregnant again," Natalie mentioned, her tone conversational. Jeff spit toothpaste into the sink. "That's nice for them. Baby number 4. I can hardly imagine. Sounds exhausting and expensive." Natalie was quiet for a long moment, folding one of his shirts with meticulous precision. Then, "Would you have wanted children? With me, I mean." Jeff stopped mid-brush and looked at her reflection in the mirror. "We discussed this years ago. You said you didn't want kids. I said I wasn't ready then. But we're older now, more established. Or we were before all this work chaos." She set down the shirt and met his eyes in the mirror. "I've been thinking about it lately. about what our family could look like, what kind of legacy we might build together. Jeff set down his toothbrush, turned to face her directly. Something tender and surprised crept into his expression, something Natalie hadn't seen in years. You genuinely want that? A baby? With everything else that's happening? Maybe not right now, obviously, but someday, when things stabilize. She crossed to where he stood and took his face in her hands gently. Would you want to be a father? He covered her hands with his own. I think I would. I think I'd like the chance to do something right, to build something good, to be better than I've been. Natalie smiled up at him with perfect warmth. Let him kiss her forehead. Let him believe in this fantasy of redemption and fresh starts. Then she never mentioned it again. Days later, when Jeff brought up the baby conversation, trying to continue the discussion, she changed the subject. When he persisted, she said they should wait until his employment situation resolved itself. When he pressed harder, she became emotional and said she wasn't sure anymore, that she needed more time to think about such a monumental decision. She watched him become increasingly obsessed with the idea, this possibility of fatherhood, this chance to prove he could be different, better, worthy of something pure. It consumed his thoughts, distracted him from other concerns, kept him from noticing the other small changes happening in the architecture of their lives, like how his brother Ryan had completely stopped returning his calls. Natalie had sent Ryan a carefully constructed email weeks earlier, a concerned wife reaching out for help understanding her husband's concerning behaviors. His increased drinking, his mood swings, his occasional flashes of verbal aggression when he felt cornered or criticized. Could Ryan please help her understand what was happening? She was worried, frightened even. Ryan, remembering the Christmas massacre, believing Natalie was a vulnerable woman seeking support from family, had responded with immediate alarm, asked if she felt safe, said he would absolutely talk to Jeff, try to help however he could. But when Ryan called his brother, Jeff was defensive, angry, accused Ryan of believing Natalie's exaggerations, of taking her side against family, of not understanding the enormous pressure he was under. The brothers fought viciously, said things siblings should never say to each other, words that couldn't be unsaid or taken back. Ryan stopped calling after that, stopped texting. The silence between them became absolute. Jeff blamed Natalie for poisoning his family against him, then apologized when she cried, then forgot about it entirely when the investigation results finally came back. He wasn't fired, but he was demoted significantly, salary cut by 40%, forced to repay $15,000 in inappropriate expenses over the next 18 months, moved to a smaller office in a different building across town, given grunt work usually assigned to junior associates fresh out of college. Public humiliation served ice cold. Jeff came home that day and sat on the couch for hours without speaking, just staring at nothing with empty eyes. Natalie brought him dinner on a tray, sat beside him in silence, held his hand. "We'll survive this," she said softly. He looked at her with eyes full of defeat and something approaching despair. "How can you still believe in me? After everything, after what I've put you through, after what I've become?" "Because I don't believe in you at all," Natalie thought with crystal clarity. "Because I stopped believing in you years ago, because you destroyed that belief one cruel comment at a time until there was nothing left but ash." But what she said was, "Because that's what love means, believing in someone even when it's hard, even when they can't believe in themselves." Jeff pulled her close, held her like she was the only thing keeping him from drowning. And Natalie looked over his shoulder at the calendar hanging on their wall, counting down. 4 more weeks. Just 4 more weeks until she could stop performing this elaborate charade. 4 more weeks until she could execute the final phase. She could survive 4 weeks. She'd already survived so much worse for so much longer. The hardest part wasn't the pretending anymore. The hardest part was remembering that somewhere underneath all this strategic manipulation, she'd once genuinely loved this man, had believed in their future together, had imagined growing old beside him. That woman felt like someone from a completely different lifetime, a lifetime before she'd learned that love without respect was just another cage. Chapter 5. The Perfect Wife's Last Performance. By late March, Natalie had transformed herself into the absolute embodiment of everything Jeff had ever claimed to want in a wife. Attentive, beautiful, supportive, present in ways that made him marvel at his unexpected good fortune. She stopped her church volunteer work, which had actually been her meetings with Lucas, to devote herself entirely to their marriage, to demonstrate that Jeff was her complete priority, her entire world, her reason for existing. It was the most elaborate and convincing lie she'd ever constructed, and Jeff believed every single word of it. His life was fragmenting in every other arena, but at home with Natalie, he finally felt genuinely valued, loved, important in ways that had nothing to do with professional status or financial success. "You're extraordinary," he told her one morning as she brought him coffee in bed, a luxury she'd started providing since his demotion. His eyes were soft with gratitude. "You know that. Better than I deserve. Better than I ever appreciated before all this happened. I'm just being your wife." "No." He caught her hand before she could pull away, drew her down to sit beside him on the mattress. "You're being perfect. You're being everything I took for granted for years and never properly valued. I don't know how I got so lucky." Natalie squeezed his hand, said nothing, because what could she possibly say? That this perfection was meticulously calculated down to the minute, that every gesture was strategic theater, that she was counting down days until she could stop pretending the sight of him didn't make her skin crawl with revulsion. Their therapy sessions had become Jeff's primary outlet for emotional vulnerability. Each week, he opened up more completely, guided by Dr. Chen's gentle questions and Natalie's encouraging presence beside him on that too-soft couch. "I think part of me actively punished her," Jeff admitted in their 5th session, his voice breaking with genuine remorse. "For being content with what I saw as so little. She wanted to be a wife and homemaker when I thought she should want more, want what I wanted, career, ambition, external validation. I resented her for being satisfied when I was constantly chasing the next promotion, the next achievement, the next thing that would finally make me feel successful." "Did you ever ask Natalie what she actually wanted from life?" Dr. Chen asked, her pen moving across her notepad in careful strokes. Jeff looked at his wife sitting beside him, really looked at her with seeing eyes for perhaps the first time in their entire marriage. "No. I honestly don't think I ever did. I just assumed, or worse, I didn't care enough to ask." "Natalie, what do you want from your life?" the therapist prompted gently. Natalie met Jeff's eyes steadily. "I want to feel seen. I want to matter as a whole person, not as an extension of you, not as someone whose only value comes from making your life more convenient. I want to exist in my own right." "You do matter," Jeff said immediately, desperately reaching for her hand. "Do I? Or do I just perform functions you've decided are valuable?" The question hung between them like smoke after a fire. Jeff had no adequate response. Dr. Chen allowed the silence to expand and breathe before speaking again. "I'd like you both to try something this week. Jeff, I want you to ask Natalie about her dreams. Not the dreams she had when you first met. The dreams she has right now. And Natalie, I want you to answer honestly, to be vulnerable about what you genuinely want." That night after therapy, they sat together on the couch with tea cooling in mugs. Neither of them was drinking. Jeff looked almost nervous. "So," he began awkwardly, "the homework assignment, your dreams, what are they?" Natalie could have told him the truth, that her dream was to be free of him, to rebuild her life without his shadow crushing every breath she took, to wake up one morning without the weight of his contempt suffocating her before she even opened her eyes. Instead, she said, "I'd like to go back to painting, take proper classes at the community center, maybe show my work at a local gallery or art fair. Nothing major, just something that's mine." "I'm genuinely sorry I discouraged that," Jeff said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with apparent sincerity. "Your painting, I thought I was being practical, helping you focus on things that would build our future together. But I was just being controlling, trying to shape you into what I thought you should be, instead of appreciating who you actually were. Yes, that's exactly what you were doing. I want you to do it. The classes, the painting, the gallery shows, whatever makes you feel like yourself again." Natalie smiled, leaned over to kiss his cheek. "Thank you for saying that." She would never take those classes, would never paint in this house again. Because in a handful of weeks, she'd be gone and none of these promises would matter. But Jeff didn't know that, couldn't conceive of it. The following weekend, Jeff planned an elaborate surprise, a trip to the mountains, just the two of them. No phones allowed, no distractions, a chance to reconnect away from the stress of his imploding career and their mounting financial pressures. "Just us," he said, looking almost shy in a way she hadn't seen since their early dating years. "A whole weekend to remember why we fell in love in the first place." Natalie's smile was flawless. "That sounds wonderful." The cabin was small and deliberately rustic. Wood-burning fireplace that crackled pleasantly, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking pine trees, heavy with late-season snow. The kind of romantic getaway designed specifically for couples trying to rekindle dying flames. Jeff tried desperately hard, cooked dinner himself, badly, burning the vegetables and under-seasoning the chicken, but the effort was impossible to miss. Poured expensive wine they couldn't really afford, built a roaring fire, held her hand across the rough-hewn table, asked her questions about her childhood, her favorite memories, her hopes for their future together, all the questions he should have asked a decade ago when they mattered. Natalie answered everyone, laughed at appropriate moments, leaned into him when he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, gazed at him with eyes full of warmth that never touched her frozen heart. That night, lying beside him in the unfamiliar bed with moonlight streaming through uncurtained windows, listening to him sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, Natalie felt the performance crushing her from the inside out. Her phone vibrated silently on the nightstand. She slipped out of bed carefully, grabbed it, locked herself in the small bathroom. Text from Lucas. "How are you holding up? I know this weekend must be difficult." She sat on the closed toilet lid and typed, "I'm fine. 2 more weeks until we file. I can maintain this that long. You're sure you want to go through with this? There's still time to reconsider if you're having doubts." Natalie looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, at the woman who'd been making perfect coffee for a decade, at the woman who'd been told she was a regret, at the woman who'd been systematically erased until she'd almost forgotten she existed. "I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life." "Okay. Monday after next, we file everything simultaneously. Are you prepared for what comes after?" "I'm ready." She deleted the conversation, washed her face, went back to bed where Jeff rolled toward her instinctively, pulling her close even in sleep. Natalie lay perfectly still in his arms and felt absolutely nothing except grim determination. The drive home Sunday afternoon was quiet, comfortable. Jeff kept reaching over to squeeze her hand like he was afraid she might evaporate if he stopped touching her. "Thank you for this weekend," he said as they pulled into their driveway. "I needed it, needed us, needed to remember that we're still solid even when everything else is falling apart." "Me too," Natalie lied effortlessly. The following week was Jeff's birthday. Natalie went all out with preparations that consumed days, invited his remaining friends, the ones who hadn't quietly distanced themselves during his professional scandal, cooked his absolute favorite meal from scratch, baked a 3-layer cake that took hours to assemble and decorate perfectly. When everyone was gathered around their dining room table, laughing and drinking wine they'd scraped together money to afford, Natalie stood and raised her glass for a toast. "To my husband," she said, her voice steady and clear and carrying to every corner of the room. 10 years together, through genuine good times and genuinely hard times. through everything life has thrown at us. Thank you for letting me be part of your life, for giving me the privilege of being your wife, for everything we've built together over this decade, to everything we've shared, to everything still waiting ahead of us. Everyone clinked glasses enthusiastically. Jeff had tears streaming down his face openly. His friends smiled and nodded their approval. Only Natalie knew what she actually meant. Thank you for showing me exactly who you are, for giving me every reason I need to do what comes next, for everything that justifies the destruction I'm about to rain down on you. Jeff pulled her into a crushing hug after everyone left. I don't know what I did to deserve you, Nat, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life being worthy of this second chance you're giving me. She hugged him back, smiled against his shoulder where he couldn't see her face. The rest of your life, she echoed softly, the words carrying a weight he couldn't begin to understand. The next morning, Natalie woke before dawn, made Jeff's coffee one final time with the precision she'd perfected over a decade. Watched him sleep for a last moment, studying the face of the man she'd once loved before he'd systematically killed that love with 1,000 careless cruelties. Then she whispered words so quiet they were nearly inaudible. Goodbye, Jeff. She walked out of the house while he was still sleeping peacefully, drove directly to Lucas's office, where everything was prepared and waiting. You ready for this? Lucas asked, his eyes serious and searching. Natalie looked at the divorce papers, the restraining order documentation, the evidence binders thick with 18 months of meticulous documentation. I was ready the day he told me I was his biggest regret. Then let's end this marriage. Natalie signed her name on every required line. Clean, final, irrevocable as death. End it, she agreed, her voice steady as bedrock. And somewhere across town, Jeff woke to cold coffee and an empty house, completely unaware that his entire life as he knew it was about to detonate around him. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. Jeff woke to wrongness. The kind of silence that feels like a warning your subconscious mind registers before your conscious thoughts catch up. He rolled over, reaching for Natalie. Her side of the bed was cold, empty, the sheets pulled tight like she'd never been there at all. He listened for sounds of her moving around downstairs, the familiar morning symphony of coffee brewing, breakfast preparations, the small domestic noises that had formed the soundtrack of his mornings for a decade. Complete silence. He got up, pulled on sweats, padded barefoot down the stairs. The kitchen was dark, no coffee brewing, no food being prepared, no Natalie humming quietly while she worked. A note sat on the counter, plain white paper, black ink in her precise handwriting. I'll see you in court. Jeff stared at those 5 words, read them again, then again. They didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. They must mean something else, some context he was missing. The doorbell rang, sharp and intrusive. He opened the door to find a man in an ill-fitting suit holding a manila envelope. Jeffrey Kinsey? Yes? You've been served. The envelope landed in Jeff's hands, and the man walked away without another word. Just left Jeff standing barefoot in his doorway, holding the end of his marriage. Jeff tore open the envelope with shaking hands. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words jumped off the page like they were trying to physically attack him. Natalie Aniston, petitioner. Jeffrey Kinsey, respondent. Irreconcilable differences. Request for division of marital assets. Request for spousal support. Request for exclusive use and possession of marital home. Request for temporary restraining order based on documented pattern of verbal abuse, emotional cruelty, and intimidating behavior. Jeff's legs stopped working. He sat hard on the kitchen floor, divorce papers scattering around him like evidence of a crime he didn't remember committing. This couldn't be happening. Wasn't possible. They'd just spent a perfect weekend together. She'd thrown him a birthday party, stood up and toasted their marriage in front of his friends, smiled at him with genuine warmth. His phone rang. Work. He ignored it. Rang again. His mother. He ignored it. Rang again. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. Mr. Kinsey, This is Martin from KeyBank. There's been a situation with your accounts. All joint accounts have been frozen pending legal proceedings. You'll need to contact your attorney immediately. I don't have an attorney. Then I strongly suggest you retain one. Have a good day, sir. The line went dead. Jeff looked at his phone, at the divorce papers, at the note in Natalie's handwriting that suddenly felt like a threat. Then he called her number, straight to voicemail. Called again, 10 times, 15, 20. Sent a text. What the hell is happening? Call me right now. The message showed delivered, then read. No response came. Jeff grabbed his keys, still in his sweats, and drove to his house. Their house, whatever it was now. Turned the corner to find a locksmith's van in the driveway. A man was systematically changing every lock on every door. Hey, what are you doing? Jeff ran toward him across the lawn. The locksmith didn't even look up from his work. Court order, man. Can't let you in. That's my house. Not according to the temporary injunction I've got here. You want to argue? Call your lawyer. The man kept working, completely unbothered. Jeff stood on his own lawn watching a stranger lock him out of his own home while neighbors peered through curtains, watching his humiliation. Judging, whispering, probably already spreading the gossip through their quiet suburban neighborhood. His phone rang. His boss. Jeff, we need to discuss an email we received from an attorney this morning regarding your conduct toward a former employee. Everything was happening simultaneously, too fast, too coordinated, like Natalie had planned every detail to create maximum devastation all at once, because that's exactly what she'd done. Jeff ended up at a cheap motel by the highway, the kind that rented by the week and asked no questions. Fluorescent lights that buzzed, suspicious stains on carpet he tried not to examine too closely. The smell of decades of other people's desperation soaked into every surface. He sat on the sagging bed and tried to process what was happening. His wife was divorcing him. He was locked out of his house. His bank accounts were frozen. His work was asking questions he couldn't answer. His family wasn't taking his calls. He tried Natalie's number one more time. This time, a man answered. This is Lucas Tanner, Ms. Aniston's attorney. She's requested that all communication go through me. I want to talk to my wife. She's not your wife anymore, Mr. Kinsey. She's my client, and she has absolutely nothing to say to you. You can't do this. You can't just take everything. Actually, we can, and we have. If you'd like to discuss settlement terms, I suggest you retain legal counsel. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. The line went dead. Jeff sat in that motel room for hours, tried calling everyone he could think of. His brother didn't answer. His mother finally picked up on the 8th try. Jeffrey, what have you done? Mum, I don't know what's happening. Natalie's divorcing me. She's locked me out of the house. Ryan told me what you said to her at Christmas, and apparently that was just one incident in years of you treating her terribly. Her voice was cold, disappointed. I didn't raise you to be cruel. It was a joke. It wasn't funny. And based on what Natalie's attorney just sent Ryan, it wasn't isolated either. A pause, heavy with judgment. I love you. You're my son, but I can't support what you've done. Figure this out. Make it right if you can. She hung up. Jeff threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the stained carpet. He was alone, completely alone, and he had no idea how he'd gotten here. That night, drunk on convenience store whiskey, Jeff drove back to the house. His house. Stood outside, pounding on the door he could no longer open. Natalie, open the door. We need to talk about this. Lights came on inside, but the door stayed locked. You owe me an explanation after everything I've given you, everything I've done for you. A curtain moved. He saw her silhouette in the window, standing there, watching him rage and crumble. Open the goddamn door! But she didn't move, just stood there on the other side of the glass, calm, still, untouchable. Police sirens cut through the night, red and blue lights painting the street. Sir, I need you to step away from the property. Jeff turned to see two officers approaching, hands resting on their belts. This is my house. According to the restraining order, you're not allowed within 500 feet. Come on, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. This is insane. You can't just lock a man out of his own house. Sir, I'm asking you nicely to leave. Don't make me ask differently. They escorted him back to his car, watched him drive away, probably wrote down his license plate. Jeff looked in the rearview mirror as his house, his life, disappeared behind him, and for the first time really understood that Natalie wasn't coming back, that this wasn't a fight or a rough patch or something they'd work through. This was the end, and she wasn't sad about it, wasn't conflicted, wasn't having second thoughts. She'd planned this meticulously. For months, maybe longer, while he'd been taking her for granted, she'd been building a case. While he'd been cruel, she'd been documenting. While he'd believed she was weak, she'd been preparing for war. Jeff pulled into the motel parking lot and sat in his car until dawn, slowly realizing he'd never actually known his wife at all. Chapter 7. The Unraveling Man. The cheap motel became Jeff's entire shrinking world. He'd wake up disoriented, take a moment to remember this was real, then check his phone for messages that never came. His boss called. The internal investigation into his relationship with Brooke was being reopened based on new information. He was being placed on unpaid leave pending the outcome. His credit cards started declining. Turns out Natalie had been the primary card holder on most of them, and she'd called to have him removed as an authorized user. His brother finally responded to texts. "Figure your life out, Jeff. I can't help you this time." Jeff hired the first attorney he could afford, a recent law school graduate working out of a strip mall office. The kid looked at Natalie's filing and went visibly pale. "This is extremely comprehensive. She's been building this case for at least 18 months, possibly longer." "That's impossible. We were fine. We just took a trip together. She threw me a birthday party." The young lawyer looked at him with something approaching pity. "Mr. Kinsey, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating people." The first court date arrived 3 weeks later. Jeff wore his best suit, wrinkled because he didn't know how to iron, and Natalie wasn't there to do it for him. He walked into the courtroom and saw her immediately. She looked transformed, hair styled differently, wearing a dress he'd never seen, standing straighter. Next to her stood a man in an expensive suit who radiated competence and barely concealed contempt, Lucas Tanner. When Natalie's eyes met Jeff's across the courtroom, he searched desperately for something familiar. Regret, hesitation, some flicker of the woman who'd made his coffee every morning for a decade. He found nothing, just a stranger wearing his wife's face. The hearing was brutal and brief. Natalie's lawyer presented mountains of evidence, therapy session recordings where Jeff admitted to verbal abuse, financial records showing the secret refinancing, credit card statements showing thousands spent on Brooke, text messages that danced along the edge of infidelity. Jeff's lawyer weakly argued these things were being taken out of context, that the recordings potentially violated privacy. That Jeff had been providing for his household and his spending was justified. The judge wasn't buying any of it. Temporary orders. Natalie retained exclusive use of the marital home. Jeff was ordered to pay temporary spousal support he couldn't afford. The restraining order remained in place. As people filed out, Jeff tried to approach Natalie. Lucas stepped between them immediately. "Back up, Mr. Kinsey. I just want 5 minutes, just to talk to her. She has nothing to say to you." Jeff looked past Lucas to where Natalie stood, her face carefully blank. Was any of it real? These last few months? The trip, the therapy, acting like you cared? For a moment something flickered in her eyes. Then she spoke for the first time since this nightmare began. "You made me invisible for a decade, Jeff. I just returned the favor." Lucas guided her away. Jeff stood in the courthouse hallway watching her walk out of his life, with her head held high. His lawyer touched his shoulder. "We need to talk about settlement options." "No, I want to fight this. I want a trial." "Mr. Kinsey, you'll lose, and it'll be expensive and public, and I don't care. She needs to answer for what she's done." But over the following weeks, Jeff's position only deteriorated further. He lost his job officially when the Brooke investigation concluded. Turns out charging personal expenses to corporate accounts was grounds for termination regardless of whether the relationship was physical. His industry contacts stopped returning calls. Word had spread about the divorce, the allegations, the scandal. He posted vaguely on social media about vindictive women and false accusations. The few friends who hadn't already distanced themselves quietly unfollowed him. Someone forwarded the posts to Lucas. They were added to the harassment file. Meanwhile, Natalie was rebuilding visibly. She'd gotten a job at a community center working with women in crisis. Started therapy with a different therapist to process years of systematic emotional abuse. Reconnected with friends Jeff had slowly isolated her from. Jeff hired a private investigator, convinced Natalie and Lucas must be having an affair. If he could prove that, maybe he could fight back, regain some ground. The PI followed her for 2 weeks, reported she goes to work, goes to therapy, has coffee with Lucas in public places, always professional, visits friends, goes home alone every night. If they're together romantically, I can't prove it, the investigator said. Keep looking, there has to be something. But there wasn't. Because Natalie wasn't with Lucas, not like Jeff imagined. They were colleagues, friends, 2 people who respected each other as equals. Everything Jeff had never been. Settlement conference happened in mid-June. Both lawyers tried to negotiate. Lucas presented Natalie's demands: the house, 70% of Jeff's retirement accounts, spousal support for 5 years, Jeff responsible for all marital debts, including the fraudulent refinancing. Jeff's lawyer countered with a 50-50 split. Lucas methodically laid out the evidence again: the fraud, the emotional abuse, the financial deception, the pattern of behavior documented over 18 months in excruciating detail. Jeff's lawyer pulled him aside. You need to settle. If this goes to trial, you'll lose everything. At least this way you walk away with something. I'm not giving her everything without a fight. Then prepare to lose in court, publicly, with all of this becoming permanent public record. Jeff refused, demanded his day in court, wanted to force Natalie to answer his questions, to explain herself, to justify destroying their marriage. His lawyer warned him, begged him to reconsider. Jeff didn't care anymore. This wasn't about assets or money. It was about making her hurt the way she'd hurt him. That night, drunk again, Jeff called Natalie's number, went straight to voicemail. He left a message he wouldn't remember the next morning. You think you're so smart, so strong, but you're nothing without me. You hear me? Nothing. When this is over, when you're alone, you're going to realize what you gave up. And I'll be laughing, The voicemail cut him off. The next morning, Lucas emailed Jeff's lawyer. Your client left another threatening voicemail. We're adding it to our harassment documentation. Tell him to stop contacting my client, or we'll pursue additional charges. Jeff's lawyer called him furious. What the hell were you thinking? I just wanted her to know. You just gave them more ammunition. Every single thing you do makes this worse. Get sober, get therapy, get yourself together before you lose absolutely everything. But Jeff couldn't get himself together, couldn't stop the spiral. He drove past the house sometimes, sat outside in his car watching Natalie's silhouette in the windows, the woman who used to be his wife living a life that didn't include him anymore. One evening he saw Lucas's car in the driveway, saw them through the window having dinner together, talking, laughing. Something inside Jeff shattered completely. He wanted to pound on the door, scream until his throat bled, demand she explain how she could move on so easily while he was drowning. Instead, he drove back to the motel and cried until he couldn't breathe. Because somewhere in all of this devastation, Jeff finally began to understand. He'd destroyed the best thing he'd ever had through 1,000 small cruelties he'd told himself didn't matter, and there was no getting it back, no undoing it, no second chance. Natalie was gone, and she wasn't coming back. Chapter 8. The trial was set for late July. Jeff's lawyer made one final attempt to convince him to settle. They're offering you a deal. Take it. Walk away with your dignity and something in your pocket instead of nothing. I want my day in court. I want her to have to answer questions under oath, to admit what she did. What she did was protect herself from you, Jeff. The jury isn't going to see her as the villain here. They're going to see a woman who systematically documented abuse so she could safely escape. But Jeff wasn't listening anymore. He'd convinced himself that once people heard his side, once they understood the full context, they'd see that Natalie was manipulative, calculating, that she'd trapped him. The trial lasted 3 days that felt like 3 years. Natalie testified first. Calm, composed, absolutely devastating in her quiet recitation of facts. She recounted specific incidents going back years. Jeff mocking her intelligence in front of his colleagues, dismissing her interests as frivolous wastes of time, the Christmas comment that had finally broken something fundamental inside her, the systematic way he'd made her feel invisible in her own life. He told people I was like furniture, she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the jury. Useful for what I did, but not worth noticing as a person. I overheard him on the phone with a work friend 18 months ago. That's when I knew I had to protect myself, when I realized he'd never see me as fully human. Jeff's lawyer tried aggressive cross-examination. Isn't it true you planned this divorce for over a year while pretending to love my client? I planned to leave an abusive marriage, yes, carefully, because I knew he'd try to destroy me if I didn't have evidence. You call it abusive, but you never sought help from anyone, never told anyone what was happening. I told his brother. I told our therapist. I documented everything because I knew no one would believe me otherwise. Emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises you can photograph. It leaves scars you carry inside where no one can see them. Natalie looked directly at Jeff then, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest constrict. Not hatred, not anger, just nothing. Like he didn't matter enough anymore to inspire strong emotions. He made me invisible, she continued, her voice steady. I'm just making sure that invisibility is finally visible to someone, to anyone who'll listen. Jeff's mother testified next. For Natalie. She described Christmas morning, described years of phone calls where she'd tried to talk to Jeff about how he treated his wife, described watching Natalie shrink and fade over their marriage while Jeff seemed completely oblivious. I love my son, she said, looking directly at Jeff with eyes full of sadness. But he treated his wife like she was worthless, like her only value came from serving him, and I'm ashamed I didn't do more to stop it. I'm ashamed I let it continue as long as I did. Jeff watched his own mother side against him and felt the last pillars of his reality crumble into dust. Ryan testified, described the Christmas incident, described Jeff's increasing contempt toward Natalie over the years, described conversations where Jeff had complained about his wife being lazy because she didn't work, despite the fact that she managed every aspect of their household. When Jeff took the stand, his lawyer had coached him extensively. Be contrite. Show remorse. Demonstrate you understand what you did wrong. Win the jury's sympathy. But when Lucas Tanner stood up for cross-examination, all that careful preparation evaporated like morning fog. Did you or did you not tell your wife she was your biggest regret? I was frustrated. Yes or no, Mr. Kinsey? Yes. Did you or did you not compare her unfavorably to your dog? That was taken out of context. Yes or no? Yes. Did you spend thousands of dollars on gifts and expensive dinners for your assistant Brooke while telling your wife you couldn't afford things she wanted? That's not the same. Yes or no, Mr. Kinsey? Yes. Did you refinance your marital home without your wife's knowledge and spend the equity on gambling and entertaining Brooke? Jeff's face flushed dark red. His lawyer was objecting, but Lucas kept going. Yes or no? Yes. Lucas walked back to his table with measured steps, pulled out a document Jeff recognized with sinking dread. Did you forge your wife's signature on the refinancing paperwork? Objection. Jeff's lawyer was on his feet. The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the question, had seen Jeff's guilty expression. When Lucas sat down, Jeff was trembling visibly. The closing arguments were mercifully brief. Jeff's lawyer argued he'd been a flawed husband but didn't deserve to lose everything. Lucas argued that Natalie had endured years of systematic abuse and deserved justice. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. They awarded Natalie everything she'd requested: the house, 75% of all marital assets, spousal support for 8 years, Jeff responsible for all marital debts, including the fraudulent refinancing. The judge delivered the verdict with barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Kinsey, you systematically diminished your wife for a decade. You committed financial fraud. You wasted marital assets on another woman while your wife went without. Your own family testified against you. I'm granting Ms. Aniston's requests in full. I hope you use this as an opportunity to examine the choices that led you here." Jeff sat numb as his lawyer gathered papers with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," the kid muttered. "I told you this would happen." Outside the courthouse, Jeff tried one final time to speak to Natalie. Lucas moved to intercept, but Natalie stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said quietly. She walked toward Jeff, stopped a few feet away, just looked at him. "Was any of it real?" Jeff asked, his voice breaking. "Did you ever actually love me?" Natalie considered the question carefully. "I loved who I thought you were when we got married, but that person either never existed or died so long ago I can't remember when. All that was left was someone who needed someone to hurt, to diminish, to make themselves feel bigger by making someone else feel smaller. I just stopped letting it be me." "I loved you," Jeff insisted desperately. "No, Jeff, you loved having someone to control, someone to make you feel important by comparison. That's not love, that's—" She paused, searching for the right word. "That's just cruelty you convinced yourself was normal." She turned to walk away. Jeff reached out, grabbed her arm. Not hard, not threatening, just desperate for connection. "Please, can we just talk? Just you and me. 5 minutes." Natalie looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. Her expression was impossible to read. "No," she said simply. "We're done talking. We've been done for longer than you ever realized. You just never bothered to notice." She pulled away gently but firmly. Lucas guided her to his car. Jeff stood on the courthouse steps, watching them drive away into a future that didn't include him. His lawyer touched his shoulder. "You should go home. Get some rest. We'll talk about next steps tomorrow." "I don't have a home." "Then go wherever you're staying. This is over now." But it wasn't over. Not for Jeff. That night in the motel room, he signed all the settlement paperwork. Every page, every line. Giving away everything he'd once thought made him someone. The house, the retirement savings, the car. Everything. He signed it all because what was the point of fighting anymore? He'd lost, completely, irreversibly, and the worst part, the part that kept him awake staring at water-stained ceiling tiles until dawn, was knowing with absolute certainty that he'd done this to himself. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every time he'd made Natalie feel worthless and invisible and less than human, it had all led here, to this moment. Alone in a cheap motel with nothing left but regret. Jeff looked at the divorce decree with Natalie's signature next to his and realized he'd never actually known his wife at all. He'd spent a decade living with a stranger, a woman he'd never bothered to see, to know, to value, and now she was gone. And he would spend the rest of his life wondering what he'd destroyed. Chapter 9. The Woman in the Mirror. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Natalie stood in what had once been Jeff's home office and was now her art studio. Morning light streamed through windows she'd cleaned herself, painting everything in shades of gold that made breathing feel easier than it had in years. Same walls, same floors, same house. But everything felt different. Lighter somehow. Like the building itself had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. She'd repainted every room in colors that made her happy instead of the neutral tones Jeff had demanded for potential resale value. Her bedroom was deep blue, like sleeping underwater. The kitchen had warm yellow accents. The living room featured artwork from local artists she'd met at the community center. The house had become hers in ways it never was during the marriage. Natalie had changed too, found pieces of herself she'd thought were lost forever. The woman she'd been before Jeff, the woman who'd almost disappeared completely. She worked full-time now at the community center, running support groups for women navigating divorce and abuse. Her supervisor kept saying she had a gift, the ability to see what someone needed before they could articulate it. "You give them hope," Maria had said. "You're proof it's possible." Natalie had started trauma therapy, real therapy, the kind that excavated years of damage and helped rebuild foundations. Some days she felt strong, other days the weight crushed her. But she kept showing up, kept doing the work. Her friendship with Lucas had deepened in ways that surprised her. They met for coffee weekly, went to dinner, talked about books and childhood and dreams. He made her laugh, really laugh, from deep in her chest. Treated her like she mattered, like her thoughts were worth hearing. One night after dinner at her house, sitting close on the couch, there was a moment, his hand almost touching hers, the air charged with possibility. "I should probably go," Lucas said quietly. "Do you want to?" "No, but I don't want to rush you either. You've been through so much." She appreciated that, the respect, the patience, the complete absence of pressure. "Maybe you could stay," she said, "if you want." "Are you sure?" She was. For the first time in so long, she was sure. They made love slowly, carefully. Two people who saw each other, valued each other, chose each other. Afterward, lying in his arms, Natalie cried, not from sadness, from relief. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm okay. I just forgot what this felt like. Being seen. You were always worth seeing. Jeff was just too damaged to know it." Morning came bright and clear. Lucas made coffee for both of them, brought her a cup exactly how she liked it. "Thank you," she said. "For coffee?" "For this. For being someone who makes coffee for me instead of expecting me to make it." Lucas smiled, kissed her forehead. "Partners make coffee for each other. That's how it works. Partners. Equal. Valued." She was learning what that looked like. Not everything was smooth. Some days Natalie struggled with trust, waited for Lucas to change, to become critical or cruel like Jeff. "I keep expecting you to hurt me," she admitted one night. "That's understandable, but I'm not him. And if I ever start acting like him, leave. You have my permission." "What if I'm too broken?" "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." Slowly, she let herself believe him. She heard Jeff had moved away, working some entry-level job, in therapy himself, trying to understand how he'd destroyed everything. Part of her felt nothing. Part of her felt something she couldn't name. Not pity, not satisfaction, just acknowledgement that he existed somewhere, dealing with consequences. He was her past, important only in teaching her what she wouldn't tolerate again. By December, Natalie was hosting a small party. Friends, chosen family, people who saw her. Lucas was there, his daughter Sarah, a smart college senior who'd said, "You make my dad happy. That's enough for me." Late in the evening, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Ms. Aniston?" A woman's voice, professional. "This is Detective Martinez. I need to speak with you about Jeffrey Kinsey. There's been an incident." Natalie's blood went cold. "What kind of incident?" "He's in the hospital, unconscious. We found him with an empty bottle of pills. There was a note. Your name was in it." The world tilted. Natalie gripped the counter. "Is he going to survive?" "We don't know yet. Can you come to the station? We need to ask you some questions." Yes. 20 minutes. She ended the call, looked at Lucas, who'd appeared in the doorway, concern written across his face. "Jeff tried to kill himself," she said, voice hollow. "There was a note. My name was in it. I'm coming with you." At the station, a detective showed her the note, Jeff's handwriting, rambling, apologetic, saying he couldn't live with what he'd done. that he'd destroyed the only good thing in his life, that Natalie deserved better, that he was sorry. "Did he contact you recently?" the detective asked. "No, not since the trial ended months ago." "Any threats? Anything that suggested he might do this?" "No, nothing." They asked more questions, verified her whereabouts, let her go. Lucas drove her home. She sat in the passenger seat, staring at nothing. "This isn't your fault," he said. "Isn't it? I destroyed him." "No, he destroyed himself years ago. You just stopped letting him destroy you too." "What if he dies?" "Then he dies, and that's tragic. But it's not your responsibility." Natalie went home, sent her guests away with apologies, sat alone in her living room, her space, her sanctuary, and cried, not for Jeff, for the waste of it all, for how broken a person had to be to choose death over facing what they'd done. Her phone rang. Hospital. Jeff had survived, was in ICU, stable. She felt nothing. Relief? Guilt? She couldn't tell anymore. Lucas came back, held her while she processed. "Do you want to see him?" he asked. "No, God, no. Is that terrible?" "It's honest." Days passed. Jeff was moved out of ICU, then to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Ryan called. "They're going to hold him for at least a week. He's really messed up, Nat. I'm sorry he's hurting, but I can't be part of his healing. That's not my job anymore." "I know. I just thought you should know." She hung up, looked at Lucas. "Am I a monster for not caring? You're a survivor for protecting yourself." Christmas arrived, 1 year since Jeff's comment, since everything changed. Natalie woke alone in her bed, made coffee just for herself, sat by her window watching snowfall. Her phone buzzed, text from Jeff. "I'm sorry for everything. You deserved so much better. I hope you're happy now. I really do." She stared at the message, typed back, "I hope you find peace," then blocked his number. Lucas arrived for dinner. They cooked together, laughed, talked. Later, sitting by her fireplace with wine, he said, "I love you, you know. I love you too. I want to be clear about something. I'm not trying to replace what you lost. I'm not trying to fix you. I just want to be with you, as you are, where you are." Natalie kissed him. "I know. That's why this works." That night, she lay in bed with Lucas sleeping beside her and thought about the year that had passed. She'd survived, more than survived. She'd reclaimed herself. The woman who'd been invisible for a decade was finally completely visible, to herself most of all. And that was everything. Chapter 10. The Winter Wife blooms. Christmas morning arrived quiet and bright. Natalie woke alone. Lucas had gone home late after their dinner, respecting her need for space on this anniversary. She made coffee in her peaceful kitchen and stood at the window watching neighborhood children play in fresh snow. 1 year since Jeff's cruelty had broken something in her. 1 year since she'd started the long walk toward freedom. She picked up her phone, scrolled through messages, friends wishing her happy holidays, her mother saying she was proud of her, Maria from work sending a photo of her family, then one from an unknown number. "Merry Christmas, Natalie. I'm out of the facility, in therapy 3 times a week. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. You gave me that gift by leaving. Thank you, Jeff." She read it twice, felt nothing. Maybe relief that he was getting help. Maybe sadness for all the years wasted. But nothing that touched her anymore. She didn't respond, just deleted the message and poured more coffee. An hour later, she was at the coffee shop picking up pastries for the dinner she was hosting when she turned and nearly collided with him. Jeff. He looked different, thinner, grey at the temples, eyes that carried weight she recognized, the kind that came from seeing yourself clearly for the first time. "Natalie," he said quietly. "Jeff." They stood in awkward silence while people moved around them, holiday shopping in full swing. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just a few minutes?" She should say no, should walk away, should protect the peace she'd fought so hard to build. but something in his face made her pause. Not pity, just curiosity about who he'd become. 5 minutes, she agreed. They sat at a corner table. Jeff held his coffee cup but didn't drink. I wanted to thank you, he said, for not visiting me in the hospital, for not letting me make you responsible for my choices. That surprised her. Okay. I know now that's what I did our whole marriage, made you responsible for my feelings, my worth, my identity. He looked at her steadily. That was never fair. I'm sorry. Thank you for saying that. Are you happy? He asked. Really happy? She thought about her life now, her work, her friends, her art. Lucas. I'm learning what happiness looks like, she said honestly. For the first time, I'm building a life that's mine, not performed for anyone, just mine. Good. You deserve that. He paused. I heard you're with someone, the lawyer who represented you. Lucas, yes. Is he good to you? He sees me, values me, treats me like an equal. She met his eyes. All the things you couldn't do. Jeff flinched but nodded. I'm glad, really. They sat in silence. Then Jeff stood. I won't contact you again, he said. I just needed to see that you were okay, that you'd survived what I put you through. I didn't just survive, Jeff. I became myself again. He smiled sadly. I can see that. Goodbye, Natalie. Goodbye. She watched him walk away through the window, felt the door close on that chapter of her life completely. Then she gathered her pastries and went home to prepare for her chosen family. That evening, her house filled with laughter and warmth. Friends. Lucas. Sarah. People who loved her for who she was, not what she could do for them. Late in the night, after everyone left, Lucas helped her clean up. You saw Jeff today, he said, not a question. I did. He apologized, said he was in therapy, wished me well. How do you feel about that? Relieved. It's done now. Really done. Lucas pulled her close. I'm proud of you, for everything. For what? For being brave enough to leave, strong enough to rebuild, open enough to try again with someone new. She kissed him. I'm proud of me too. They stood in her kitchen, her sanctuary, her home, her space, and she felt complete in a way she'd never felt during her marriage. Stay tonight, she said. You sure? I'm sure. Later, lying in bed with Lucas sleeping beside her, Natalie thought about the woman who'd made Jeff's coffee for 10 years, who'd been told she was a regret, who'd been compared to a dog, who'd been systematically erased until she'd almost disappeared. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, who demanded respect, who built a life on her own terms. Natalie Aniston had been a winter wife for a decade, frozen, enduring, waiting for warmth that never came. But she hadn't waited for spring. She'd become her own sun,